Hi there, good evening to you, good morning to you, good afternoon, wherever it is you are in the world. Eimear Burke here, and welcome to another Fireside Chat where I speak with a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. And this is our 35th Fireside Chat. So just type in your name and let me know where you're from. I see Agatha Velvet, welcome from the hills of California, and Aquila from very windy Bournemouth. Hi, Mervyn from Skegness, and Sherry from New York, Lisa from Washington. Hi, Dean from Bedfordshire. It's great to see familiar names. It's certainly very wet and windy here in Kilkenny. It's been quite wild. So it seems a few weeks ago that we actually had sunshine. But and there's Ava from Belgium. Welcome. Hi, Ali from North Yorkshire, lovely, and Jos from Canada. It's gone now, Canada. Somebody from Florida, Linda from Maryland, lovely. Stephanie from Utah, great to see you again. Donald from Virginia. Oh, Iceland, welcome. Hi, Linda, well done. You've made it again from Australia. That's wonderful. And somebody from Florida. And Isolt from France, you're very, very welcome. We have a saying here in Ireland that a wet and windy May fills the barns with fodder and hay. And it's -2 in Australia. Ooh, it's about 11. Well, earlier it was 11 degrees here in Kilkenny. But I remember 15 years ago, we had a similar really, really wet and windy May, and we had a scorcher of a summer. So I'm just hoping that's what we'll have, because in Ireland, we're obsessed with the weather, always talking about it. So anyway, lovely to have you all here. And hi, Anne from London, and Eva from Brittany. Oh, welcome. You're on your way to Brittany. Oh, wonderful. And Catherine from Australia. Wonderful. Hi, Ronnie from West Yorkshire. So let me introduce you to my guest this evening. And we're going to Glastonbury, actually. And I'd like to welcome Liz Cruse. Liz, it's so lovely to have you here.
It's really lovely to be here. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Wonderful. I'm finding it hard. Can you come a little bit closer to your computer? Just check that we...
better? Can you hear me?
It's much better. So let us know if you can hear us, if the sound... This is our audience. Hi, Mark from Windy Cornwall. Oh, Windy also. Wonderful. So, Liz, I remember, I suppose I saw you, the first time I met you was my first summer gathering, which was 2011 in the town hall, maybe.
Yes, probably, or maybe was it a Druid Gorse?
Well, that's when we really got to know each other, I think.
But yes, probably 2011.
I went in 2012, I think, to my first. Was it? Yes, my first Druid Gorset, I think.
Right.
So, and you were living in Bristol at that time.
At that time, I think I was probably still, yes, I was in Bristol, and gradually I've edged my way southwest and now find myself in Glastonbury, which is, a very druidic place to be.
I imagine so many people would just love to live there. So just let us know many of our viewers may have never been. So describe it, and there's that piece, and then there's also, what's it like living there? I mean, I only ever visit, so what's it like to be living there?
Well, let me take the landscape first.
Lovely.
It's very special. Some of you will have been there, but for those of you who haven't, Glastonbury is situated on the old Isle of Avalon, or Innis Witrin, the Isle of Glass. And the town is on a mound, a hill, and then there's kind of like a depression all around it, and then the hills rise up. the Mendips and the Quantocks and so on. So if you imagine a huge sandcastle with a moat around it,
Yes.
shape, and then on top of the island of Avalon, or the old island, there is of course Glastonbury Tor, in some people's minds the sacred centre of the world, topped with a tower that used to be a medieval church until it was felled by an earthquake in, I think, the 14th century. The area used to be, it really used to be an island because the sea surrounded it, but then the sea level dropped, the Romans drained a lot of the land, it was re-inundated, I think, under the Saxons. But there's been lots of drainage to create the Somerset levels and the moors. So it's a very special landscape, and you can see the Tor and the Isle of Avalon from miles away. So it's lovely when I drive back, because I can see, oh, I'm nearly home now, even though it's another 15 miles or so. But
I remember the first time driving from Bristol and coming up over a hill and then seeing the Tor and the plains. It was just magical. I was like, I got this huge surge of energy. It was like, oh my God, there it is. And yes, you're right. You still drive a bit before you arrive there.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to see how the ancient people might have considered it, would have almost certainly considered it as a very sacred and special place, because it is so visible and it's such an unusual feature. So it's quite strange. And as for what it's like to live here, well, I think the answer is it's never boring. I like it because it is a very tolerant place. I feel that if I wanted to dress in a tutu and walk down the road with my long grey hair, no one would turn a hair. So it's very accepting in that sense. And of course, there are many, many different spiritual traditions represented here, not just the pagan, although the pagan in its various manifestations does feature very strongly. The energy can be, it can be quite difficult sometimes, because the town does attract a lot of people maybe looking for healing, following a spiritual path, looking for answers. And so there is a reception centre for people with that kind of search, which I believe does a lot of good work in terms of helping people who, you know, sometimes people are slightly perhaps off kilter for this reason. And it's a very beautiful place. I feel so privileged because the landscape around is so lovely. And, you know, I can walk out from my door and there are beautiful paths and fields. So, yeah, it's you know, like anything, a mixed bag. But, yeah, I'm enjoying it so far.
Do you have a place that's... this is really crudely put, but that's more sacred to you within Glastonbury than something else? Do you have a favorite place that has spiritual or sacred significance to you, for you?
Well, the obvious place is Chalice Well, where I've been visiting since I was, well, since 1983 was the first time.
Okay.
That's somewhere that many tourists and, you know, many people are drawn to. That doesn't in any way diminish it. Quite near me, though, there's a field with a path running through the bottom of it, and there's just a sort of ditch at the bottom where cattle come to drink sometimes, a big ash tree. I love to sit there, and I've done sometimes rituals there. I've needed to honour the land in some way. So that is a particular place that tourists wouldn't really visit. And it's not on the map, so to speak, but then it is my firm belief that we can make almost anywhere sacred.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I don't know what brought you to Druidry, and how did you find OBOD?
Well, it didn't happen until my very early 50s. I was brought up Church of England, but like many young people, I came to adolescence in the late 60s and early 70s. So that kind of lapsed. But in my late 40s, I began to feel the need for some kind of spiritual path. And at first I thought I would investigate the church of my youth, as it were, because I always loved churches and the traditional liturgy and sacred music. And I was in Cambridge at that time, where there are lots of, beautiful churches and chapels with beautiful music. But long story short, I found, although I love the aesthetics of traditional Anglicanism, some of the beliefs I just couldn't accept, particularly the idea that as a Christian you are supposed to proselytize. Christianity is the best thing and no one else has got it quite right. And I remember sitting in a church hearing people say this and thinking, no, I just can't accept this. This wipes out my Buddhist friends, my Hindu friends, my Muslim friends. And then if there is such a thing as chance, I was having some counselling at the time, and my counsellor had a leaflet, a flyer for a workshop he was doing in Glastonbury. And he was doing it in conjunction with Philip Carr-Gomm, chosen chief of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. So I must be frank and say I looked at this and saw Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids and thought, visualise some elderly gentleman with a long beard. But I thought the subject of the workshop was the inner masculine and feminine. And I thought, well, that's a very interesting subject. So I went along to the workshop, and it was mostly composed of OBODs. Probably because it had been advertised through the OBOD network. And the first person I met was Philip. And then I met the other people, and it very quickly became clear to me that these were people I could really relate to. They were down to earth. They obviously loved nature. And I had been involved in Greenpeace and concern for the environment for a long time. And I just thought maybe there's something here for me. So I signed up, but I have to say I had never been interested in anything remotely pagan. And for the first 6 months, I was like, what have I got myself into? Is this okay? Am I going a bit mad? Because it was far outside of my previous experience. But it just, made such sense to me as I followed the Guernsey and the Bardic braid. And I haven't looked back since. And I can honestly say it did change my life. Because I think being encouraged to see nature as animate, just made the world a richer place. And I had always felt, I had lots of friends and I'd had an interesting life up to that point. But this added a whole new dimension. And I had always felt a certain, I suppose, inner loneliness, really.
Mm.
I remember one day I went to some woods as part of my, activity, the practicum of some sort. And I was sitting there and everything was so alive and there were two pigeons flirting in the tree. And I suddenly thought, oh, there's this change inside me. I don't feel that inner loneliness anymore. And obviously I'd met people too, and so that's been brilliant. But even now, I don't have to be with people to feel that other beings are with me and that I'm part of the web of things.
I think that's so wonderful, and I so identify with that the company of nature, and like you say, the animation within nature is just so fantastical, be it plants or birds or animals. It just, in a sense, I find so reassuring, that
Yes.
My friends are out there,
Yes, it is. And of course, this is what Indigenous people world over say and act out in their lives. But we in the industrialized capitalist world have many of us become so separated from the natural world and see it just as something to be used. So we have lost sight of that. And I think the rediscovery of it is it's a very important thing. And has been for me. And, it would be nice to think that other people can discover that too.
Absolutely. And you're an activist, and you were obviously an activist before you start. In terms of Druidry and how you express it, is it something you are, or something you do, or is it both?
Well, I think it's both. And I must say, during my life, my activism, as it were, has taken many different forms.
Mm-hmm.
For me as a Druid, it is definitely about justice.
Okay.
Because if we just think about climate change, it's desperately unjust. The industrialized world has basically exported its pollution and has exploited the southern world. I hate the word undeveloped, or all those things.
Yeah.
So climate justice is vital. But even before I was a Druid, it just seemed so obvious to me that we only have this world to live on, and we should take care of it. I grew up in the country, so I've always been in touch with nature in a way, I suppose. And there was never much question in my head. So, earlier on, I actually mainly did fundraising for Greenpeace and demonstrations and things like that. So for me, it's a vital part of my life, but now obviously of my Druidry. But of course, not everyone necessarily feels like that. And I don't think I think there are many different ways of making a And I myself went through the closest to frontline activism that I've ever been involved with as part of what we called the Warriors' Call, which you'll remember.
I do indeed.
And that was, when I look, that lasted from about, well, we had a big ritual in Glastonbury. It was anti-fracking, that was the focus. And I think the suggestion that there would be fracking here, which is such a damaging process, it's energy intense, it's, pollutes water, it damages the land, it's forever. And that was such a no way. So a few of us got together and we did this big ritual under Glastonbury Tour in 2013. And there followed various trips to frontline anti-fracking camps. We had a anti-fracking training camp in Wales.
Okay.
When I look back on it, I think, where did I get the energy from? And I was speaking to a friend about it, and I said, it was almost as though something took hold of us, like we were possessed for those years. And he said, well, I know we were. Because there was such a powerful impetus. And that wasn't to do with me or any individual. I really felt that some spirit of the land was helping us or taking charge of us. And of course, thankfully, fracking per se there were 1 or 2 fracks done up near Blackpool, but they caused earthquakes, and it never caught on in a big way in this country. And the companies that were set up really on a speculative basis to see if it was feasible just died a death. But I don't think I could do that kind of activism now. I've got older, I suppose, and I don't have the energy it took. It also, it's also very demanding psychologically. I and several of my friends learned that more vividly than I had realized before, that there are powers at work in us. I mean, I just mean governments and corporations, nothing kind of esoteric, at work in our society that don't necessarily want people's voices to be heard. And it's very disconcerting when you are involved in some kind of protest and it's happening and that the whole community might be against something, but it doesn't feature on the news, it doesn't feature in the newspapers very much. And then, I remember listening to a program on the radio where Britain's chief geologist was interviewed, and about this time she was saying, oh yes, I'm sure we can manage fracking responsibly. And so I began to see the hidden agendas, or the overt agendas, but and a lot of things that I had previously taken for granted or trusted.
Yes.
I didn't feel like trusting so much. And it's very easy to get paranoid. The police definitely take an interest in you if you become involved in these subversive activities, as it was certainly seen at the time. So yeah, it's I would never. Well, let me put it positively. I deeply admire people who really get involved in frontline activism and direct action, and I know several who are still not about fracking, but being involved with XR and stuff. My involvement with Extinction Rebellion has been, I've been involved, but fairly minimally. I went to London a couple of times, but the people who glue themselves to government ministries and have, get arrested, I am full of admiration, but I don't think I can do that myself. Not now, anyway.
Well, Linda says you're very brave and understand not continuing. And then Jules' cousin says the rituals had enormous energy, and I'm sure they did. And Jenna from Texas, sadly, fracking is a part of my state. My country is terribly bad at listening to the land. Thank you for your story.
My heart goes out to people who have to live with it. And thank you, Linda, for saying that I was brave. I suppose it's like anything. When you do something out of conviction, it's like I felt there was no choice at that time. And I had good friends, good allies, and it really helped. We all felt that OBOD was completely behind us, and that really helped. That was really brilliant.
I remember when you held the ritual, organised the ritual in Glastonbury. I and Howard were running a workshop that weekend, and we did a ritual here in our grove in the garden here, and then did one in the following March because you had another one.
Yes, we and I must say it wasn't just me. I really want to give credit to all the colleagues who I worked with. But yes, we did several worldwide rituals. We went through all the elements, and that was amazing. Actually, people joining in from across the world, and I certainly believe. Well, of course, I'm a druid, but I believe ritual does have great power. And a friend of mine was deeply involved with the camp that was at Upton in Cheshire. And, they held the camp for a long time. Eventually, they got evicted.
Just explain to our viewers what that is about.
Okay, so there was a place called Upton, a little village near a town called Chester, which is in the northwest of England. And a company called Quadrilla wanted to explore and see if it was worth fracking there for gas. And so what happened was the companies would take a lease on a field, and then if people knew about it soon enough, they could occupy the field and hold a protest camp there where people would live. So mostly they're not pagan, they were activists of other sorts. So a friend of mine who lives up there, he is pagan and did a lot of practical support work. So that's the doing, but also ritual, magical working. So this went on, and eventually, as happens with these camps, and is happening with a project in England to build a big railroad through lots of woods at the moment, the camps get evicted, the land gets repossessed, because part of the motivation is to make things difficult for the companies and to show them that there is no social license, that people in the area do not want this. So the camp at Upton was evicted, but that winter solstice, just before it was evicted, lots of us went up there and we did a solstice ceremony in the field. And it did feel, those of you out there who, you know what ritual's like at its best, when your individuality is swept away and something comes through you. And I certainly felt a power beyond myself. That's all I can say, really.
Mm-hmm.
And we made the firm intention that that land would not be fracked. But a week later, the camp was evicted. My friend was distraught. We went up there for one last, as we thought, demonstration to show that the village didn't want it. There were police helicopters buzzing around. And then about a week or so later, Quadrilla withdrew.
Wow.
No, I mean, no, I can't, obviously, I can't, we can never say it was because of that ritual, but it certainly, I don't know, it's imponderable. But they gave no real excuse, and the police were furious because they'd spent loads of money on policing. I don't know if the company ever paid the money back, but anyway.
Sarah London says the lighting of beacons across the land to fight fracking was very moving and the energy was incredible. I remember that as well. Somebody says here, fracking becomes even more problematical when fossil fuel production is the main source of income, livelihood for those living in the area. Feel you're taking away their ability to live. We need alternatives for those folks.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that's all part of the idea of justice, that we could create jobs for people with green energy and with alternatives to, I was thinking today, there's this phrase development. In England at the moment, they're building loads of houses and green fields. It's called development. I call it destruction. But this is to kickstart the economy, but supposedly. But I think, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had restoration, jobs
Yes.
in restoration, converting old buildings properly to make homes, restoring land that's polluted, restoring crafts that people have lost. Restoring the fertility of the soil, all those things.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So those were my sort of glory days, if you like. But now, in terms of activism, I'm much more sort of low-key and community-based. I mean, so, and of course, the pandemic was a wonderful opportunity to become involved in this way. And in Glastonbury was very good. We had great community volunteering. And I think Druidry is about community as well, very much so. So I, as a Druid, again, I mean, as a citizen as well, felt that I really wanted to contribute to my community during the pandemic. So, I volunteered to help people shop and fetch prescriptions and all that sort of thing. And I also, very fortunately, just before the pandemic, volunteered to work on a community-supported agriculture scheme, an organic farm.
Oh.
Where I do propagation mainly because I'm not big and tough to do planting and ploughing and stuff. But that to me is a really important kind of activism, because that is about trying to create a new paradigm for agriculture. and one in which the land is fed and nourished and nurtured, and not sort of stripped of its nutrients to provide, GM corn or whatever.
Haley says something, bringing back community would bring back responsibility for your own environment, don't you think?
I absolutely do. Because it's only if we're cut off from our environment that we don't respect it. If we need to grow food there, then it's... And so many people, villages have often become dormitory. I'm sure it's probably the same in Ireland, Eimear. Villages are now places where people live and then commute to a city.
For work, yeah.
Although, of course, with the pandemic, that might change as well, home working.
But it's interesting looking at, I was 2 weeks ago, I was at a family funeral. My first cousin died suddenly in New York, but they managed to bring his body home for the funeral. And as I was driving with my mother from Offaly to Mayo, where the funeral was, and even the town where I was brought up, 2 premises are open, a fast food place and the supermarket and maybe the pharmacy. But all of the coffee shops, the pubs, restaurants, other shops, all closed. And so many of the towns we passed through were like dead, gone. And yet people are living, maybe working from home, but the town itself or the village itself changed. Now, whether when we open up, we're behind you. I mean, pubs and restaurants aren't open yet at the moment, but hairdressers and barbers by appointment are. Who knows what is going to happen? And my mother likes to go to mass. She's a good Roman Catholic, and she loved, go every day and then down to the local coffee shop to meet people and chat. And that stopped. And the coffee shop, I don't know if it's going to open again. And that's a really important, social hub for people to be able to sit and chat and connect. And the more connected you are to the people, the more connected you are to the issues in the village or the town and the landscape.
Yes.
And that helps you have that responsibility that Haley refers to, that you can be really of service in your community. So,
yeah, absolutely.
It's a big, big challenge. But go on.
It's a challenge in all sorts of ways, because obviously we talk about our Druid community, the OBOD community, but the pandemic made me realise how dispersed that community is, and how we have, it's only possible because we've depended on cars and, aeroplanes to get us to assemblies, and it's lovely when we're there, but this is a sort of artifact of our industrial and post-industrial society, isn't it? And I'm involved with a Druid camp called White Horse Camps, which some of you out there may have been to or heard of. And we've had online rituals and online Eisteddfods to keep people connected. And it's desperately sad not to be able to meet in person. But equally, our event lead was saying online the other day, well, maybe we don't need to do this anymore now, people can meet up again. And a few people said, oh, it's been so nice being able to connect from, Italy or Belgium or wherever. And can we keep going? So maybe we'll have a mix in the future.
It's really struck me having these chats. And of course, Philip had already started his teas, that's, I think maybe 3.5 years now at this point. But even we started at the Order doing online rituals. And how it's open, the online piece has opened Druidry up to our members in such in a bigger way, because so many of our members are solitary Druids. who may have had no contact. And I know people saying, this is my first OBOD ritual. This is so wonderful. Please keep doing this. That I've been really, really impressed at how well they've worked and the response to them. I like the physical gathering, but that's for the people who can travel or who live locally enough. So there needs to be, that's one of the advantages of this technology in a time of pandemic, that we have actually been able to connect. And like you and I are talking, otherwise we wouldn't be having this conversation, and nor would we be listening or reading people's comments and people joining in the discussion. So it's, I suppose, how we manage to do a hybrid. That's a challenge. Yes, so Stephanie says, absolutely love the online community here. So, yeah, and you know, I see it's lovely, familiar names and new names, so everybody's welcome. But I'm getting to know names that I see here, and it's really lovely that, you know, this is important for people. And it's okay. Jules says, I think COVID restrictions have reconnected me with my local land and my craft. I would agree. I got back into my herbs last year because I'm a herbalist, but I was so busy. I'd forgotten about it and started. And even this, you know, I've been making my tinctures again and harvesting. And that is really lovely to say, I'm here. Yes, I can connect with the landscape.
Yes.
And Sarah says, online access is vital in keeping those of us who are lonely and remote connected. Please keep it post. I hear you, Sarah. Mark says, the online rituals have been really helpful. I'm glad that we've had them and hope they continue. No pressure, guys. It's lovely to meet druids from all over the world through online meetings. So it's yeah, people are really strong about this. Jenna says, I quite enjoy these chats and rituals, and Dave the Bard has had online concerts. There's one this weekend. I live too far away to travel to gatherings, and I feel so close to everyone in these chats, no matter how far apart we are in distance. I think, yeah, this is, I'm really, really hearing it.
Yes. It's interesting how the pandemic has made techies of us all. Yeah.
And I'm really surprised at myself. Saying Joan, as long as I remember to unmute, Eimear. Thank you, Jane. Yes, with our last ritual, I'd forgotten to unmute, even though I was telling everybody else to pay attention. I'd lost it. But anyway, apologies for that. But it's I do look forward to seeing some of you humans in real life. Absolutely, Tara. That's also important. So it's about being able to have both, and how we manage that, I think, is really, really important.
Absolutely. And I mean, you know, being in the flesh, and so, you know, one of the things that I've always liked about Druidry and OBOD Druidry is that it does emphasize the validity of our bodies. You know, it's not just a sort of heady, hey man, ascension. You know, it's about being grounded. It's about the energy, yeah, sure, the inspiration that comes from above, but also the nuivre that comes up from the earth, which is our, you know, our mother. So yes, so it's important not to go completely virtual, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So it's somehow managing to do both. How we're going to do it, I don't know. But anyway, it's all up there to be looked at. And I mean, you know, a year and a half ago, we wouldn't have been even having this conversation. You know, the idea of having an online ritual is like, no, it's inappropriate. It won't be right. And yet, the first online thing was the installation ceremony last year, and that was really profound for me. You know,
it was. I was witness to that, and it was very profound.
Who'd have thunk it? I would not have predicted that. So, so are there any in-person events that happen in the United States? Yes, Kyler, there are the Gulf Coast Gathering, DOOR, I was going to say MAGA, no, Magus, there are a number, if you find out from the website, I don't know when they're going to do it, if they're going to be doing it in 2021. But yes, there are gatherings that happen in the US. So, talking about connecting with your Nuivra and your grounding, and do you have a daily practice, like a personal practice?
I must say I don't do a daily meditation or anything like that, but I do go outside. I don't have much garden here, but I do like to go outside every day and connect with my plants. I have a small garden for pollinators. So, and insects now are so threatened. And I'm just pleased to see every ant and every fly and every bee. And so I suppose walking the landscape here and going out and connecting with my garden is my daily practice, really. And then obviously I observe the festivals of the wheel. And sometimes use divination cards, if I have a particular issue. I think it's all these things are ways of centering and finding a place of stillness and peace in our very distressing world. Sometimes, it's a way of standing back from that, which I think all good spiritual traditions give us, actually. But what as I've said, probably what I love about Druidry is that it is about nature and the land primarily. For me.
Today is World Bee Day, Stephanie says. I wasn't aware of that, even though I have 2 beehives. Every day is World Bee Day for me. when I didn't hear them today because it's been too wet and windy, but yesterday there was a bit of sun, and then suddenly you hear this hum in the garden, and it just makes me tingle, because it's like, it changes everything in the garden to have bees.
Oh, it does. I haven't got beehives, but obviously the solitary bees are as important, and there are hives in the area. I have a cotoneaster bush. I don't know.
Yeah, I do know cotoneaster, yes.
Absolutely. At the moment, it has these tiny little blossoms, but it hums with bees. Yeah. And it's just magical. And all sorts, honeybees, early bumblebees, I think leafcutter bees as well. So it's really, really exciting.
And even though, cotoneaster isn't certainly native to Ireland, I don't know about if it's native to the UK, but it has so many small flowers that it must be just an absolute bee haven, because when you see it in flower, it's beautiful, and then you see it later in berry, it's just so dense. It's just, it must be lovely for them. Absolutely.
Yes, at the farm they had an early flowering cherry tree, very early flowering, like March or something, and I went there, and it was so lovely when all the other trees were bare. To actually, you could hear this. They've got hives, and you could hear the tree humming.
Oh, it's magic.
It is magic, actually. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. What would you say has been your greatest achievement, or what is it you've done that you're most proud of?
As a druid, or
as anything, as Liz.
As Liz. Well, to be honest, I think one of the things that really gives me the most delight is my pollinator garden, because I've always, before, I lived in flats or places where I couldn't do anything with the garden. And when I came to this house, it wasn't ideal because it didn't have a huge amount of land. And the yard at the back was gravel and decking. And there was a large tub of Roundup on the side of the wall. I know, exactly. So I thought, I'm not going to put up with this, is going to change. And then I probably would have thought of a pollinator garden anyway, but there was a patch of a kind of comfrey just outside the house. And one day, just after in the early 2017, I was standing by this flowering comfrey. It flowers quite early, and this huge bumblebee, zoomed into it. And I just suddenly thought, got to make a pollinator garden. So it's completely, I can see it now as I look out of the window. And it's just so wonderful to have transformed it from this utterly sterile place into, a small garden, but one where wildlife, I've got a pond, and magically frogs appeared in it. Yes. And yesterday, partly due to something else, another course I'm doing, I did a survey of how many, because I let my verge grow wild and the grass at the other end of the house. And I have an old hedgerow running down one side. And I did a quick survey to see how many wildflowers there were. And I counted 33 different species of flower. And yeah, it is. And it's like, these are all my friends. I've enabled them to come here, really. And this year, bugle has appeared. I don't know if you know. Do you know?
I know bugle. Yes, I do. I have it. Yes.
Yeah.
The beautiful blue. Yeah.
It's wonderful. And it's not been there before. So things do come. So, I mean, that's certainly something I'm really, really proud of.
Did you have to dig, to get rid of the gravel, or have you got it in pots, or what did you do?
I just dumped it. I've got a drive with gravel down one end, so I just got someone to dump it down that end. So that was easy.
You cleared the gravel, and now you have your
cleared the gravel, and then, I must admit, I got help, but someone dug it over and added compost and planted it and paved and so on.
So what in addition to comfrey have you? And you have your 34 wild plants, but what else did you consciously plant as a pollinator?
There's lavender. There's some sort of simple variety of pinks. There's lady's mantle.
Lovely.
Daffodils in spring. There's some kind of scabious, which the bees are for, and some kind of cultivated variety of, like, yellow archangel? Do you know that plant? It's like white dead nettle.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yellow. And it's not yellow archangel, but it's a plant like that. I've got some foxgloves coming up. I've got, actually, betony has taken up root. That's a wild plant, but forget-me-nots. So, I've got lots of snapdragon, columbine. And also hedge garlic has sort of invaded down one border, but that's great because that's good for butterflies.
What's hedge garlic?
Well, it's a tall plant with white flower. I think some people call it hedge mustard. Little white flowers with like serrated heart-shaped leaves, and it tastes of garlic. You can eat it. It tastes sort of mustardy, but it smells slightly garlic flavored. It's a plant for orange-tipped butterflies.
Okay, I think I know it, and I didn't know it was called that. I must check the taste because there's some of it near me. Garlic mustard, Dean White says, is that it? I must check that out because there's a plant which has serrated leaves and it has little white flowers. And I thought, I wonder what that is. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Beware, because it is very invasive. It's okay in a wild bit, but it has, it runs roots along and then it keeps going. So, yes. I produced a poetry book of my work. quite a long time ago now. So obviously that was great.
Well done.
Yeah. And well, there's loads of things actually. I also am a storyteller, as you know.
Yeah.
And to be honest, completing the OBOD Guernsey was quite an achievement. You know, I mean, 15 years.
Oh, I had a similar journey. I remember you led. It must have been the second Druid Gorsa I went to, and you did it on. Our homework was to read Vita Merlini by Geoffrey of Monmouth, and I was a good girl. I went and I got it and I read it, and to my horror, I discovered that Stonehenge had been stolen from the Irish and brought to Salisbury Plain. I got such a kick out of this. I can still remember Stephanie saying, "That's not true, Eimear," and I said, "Well, Geoffrey of Monmouth says it is." And I said, "I can't let Irish people know there's going to be another war." And then when some months back, when they found that the stones had been found in Wales, in a part of Wales that had been occupied by Irish, I thought, I knew it. And then Stephanie agreed with me. You were right all along. I just hilarious. But I always remember, because that was in Oxfordshire, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. I can't remember.
Some abbey.
Very beautiful abbey. Yes. Yes, that was. I really enjoyed doing that actually. Yes, I remember asking the groups to act out various episodes from the life of Merlin.
It was wonderful.
It's a fantastic document, that all Geoffrey of Monmouth's life of Merlin.
Well worth reading. It's not very. It's concise. Well worth reading. Yeah,
it is worth reading, and I think, like a lot of these texts, has echoes in it of a much earlier tradition. I was thinking, I was thinking that today a lot of these things are written down, obviously, by monks, like the Mabinogion. But you can, like, in terms of the Mabinogion, I had quite a difficult relationship with it, really, for a long time, because it just didn't really seem to make sense. But as time has gone on, I've learned more, because I do not have Celtic roots, really, as far as I know. But as time has gone on, I've learned much more about Irish culture and Welsh culture. And so the stories, I find them easier to read now. But I do think it's very interesting that, for example, in the story of Culhwch and Olwen, the very early Arthurian one, the story of the 5 animals of Britain, I imagine, and if Ronald Hutton were here, he'd probably put me right, but I can't help feeling that must reflect on some very early shamanic culture. Because it doesn't quite fit somehow with the rest of the story, which is about, the soldiers and lords, and it just seems an interjection somehow.
We have the 5 oldest animals as well in Irish.
Are they the same?
In the story of Tuan Macaral, he is interviewed by a saint, and he says, we've got 2 men who lived thousands of years. There's Fionn Mac Bóchna, he was the first man in Ireland, or one of the first 3, with Kesser, the first woman. And then there's Tuan Macaral. And I lived my life as a stag, as an eagle, as a salmon, as a boar. How many is that?
That's 4.
And there might be another one, and I can't remember. Forgive me. But he talks about that. And while he is in each of these incarnations, he tells the story of the people who came and who either were defeated or who died and left. And he witnessed all of this in one of his animal incarnations. So that's there in the Irish texts.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I suppose, I don't know. I mean, there probably was a common cultural.
Oh, there was. I mean, in the Táin Bó Cúailnge, where you have the story of Maeve from Connacht and the fight over the brown bull of Cooley, and you have Cuchulainn and Ferdia fighting. So you've got Connacht fighting Ulster. And as Queen Maeve is setting off to the battle, she meets Fidel, who's a seer. And she says, "Where have you been?" And she said, "I have been studying the art of seership in Alban." Now, Alban would be our old name, would be our name for Scotland, but you think of the whole island as a whole. And so she asked her for a prophecy, and she gave a prophecy, and there was blood in the prophecy. But that notion of going back and forth between the two islands, and then also you have in I can't, is it the gruesome one where poor old Branwen, is that the second?
Oh, I can never remember.
Mabinogi.
Yeah.
She marries the Irish king, and she's very unhappy. So there's that toing and froing between Wales or Britain and Ireland as well, from the Welsh stories, and then we also that going overseas as well.
And Tristan and Isolde as well
is Irish, yeah. And then it seems to be beyond that as well, yeah.
Yes. So yeah, it's fascinating, and it's been an education for me, because I have loved the Arthurian myth since I was 7. You know,
Mm-hmm.
When I was 7, I won a book at school, and it was the stories of King Arthur. But,
wonderful.
You know, as getting into Druidry, of course, I realised that these stories actually have their basis in Welsh and Irish mythology. And that's very interesting as well. Yeah. So yes, Glastonbury is quite a good place for me to end up, because I remember reading about Joseph of Arimathea coming to Glastonbury when I was 7.
And bringing the Grail with him.
Yes, that's right. Yes, totally. Although that's probably a Christian. Well, there is the I think it's ancient Old Welsh story of the descent into King Arthur's raid on the underworld. But my pronunciation is probably wrong, but the Prytoi Anu, where King Arthur takes some knights and they go down into the underworld to get the great cauldron.
Yes.
Which is, I guess, is
it Pryderi? Is that the name of the ship?
That's the ship, yeah. And only 7 returned or something. But I mean, that's I think that's the precursor of the Grail.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. What you've achieved a huge amount between your poetry, and I just love the idea, of a pollinator garden that just, and it's ongoing contribution to the land, and to the future, I think is wonderful. What has been the biggest challenge that you've had that you've overcome?
To be honest, I think I've had a very lucky life in many ways, and if anything, I suppose one of my biggest challenges has been to get out of my head.
Yep.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And to learn that there are other ways of knowing things. And that really, again, came to me through, joining OBOD and following the Worsi and all byways that took me down. And yeah, that's been really hard for me, actually, because I am naturally quite cerebral. And, you know, I grew up, you know, I now accept that our education system in England really doesn't serve every child and crushes imagination often, and I think probably had a fairly crushing effect on mine, actually. But because I was naturally academic, I was heftily rewarded in that way, and it came easily to me. So, you know, why would I have to pursue other ways of being, other ways of knowing? But I think that probably made me, in some ways, limited, perhaps. And of course, the Bardic course encourages you to explore your creativity. And I've met people through Druidry that I would never have met had I. It's taught me to be open, to be more tolerant, and to learn that my way is not the only way. So, and that actually, I mean, in terms of, you know, pain, it's not what some people have to suffer, but it has sometimes been quite a painful process, and something I still struggle with, really. I mean, through various circumstances, I joined a small art class here in Glastonbury. It's art. They do a meditation and you just paint. And honestly, my first session was really quite scary for me, because because it took me straight back to experiences at school. You know, what I used to train teachers. I used to train teachers of adults, particularly. And I used to say, you know, what teachers say, even to adults, it rings in their people's heads. And what people say to children stays with them for a lifetime. And, you know, I remember art teachers at secondary school kind of being less than enthusiastic about what I produced.
Yes.
And so, you know, I was like, well, I'm no good at art. Same with, oh, I can't sing. Because some teachers sort of gave me that feeling. So trying to work with those and having also the humility to accept that, no, actually, I don't know everything, and there are ways in which I can develop. And yeah, so I guess that's actually an ongoing challenge, Ina, to be honest.
Well, welcome to the club. And I think, you know, if you're a heady person, you know, it's a great security blanket. It's a great anchor. And because it's so affirmed in the culture in which we live, to let that go a little bit and open up to some other way of knowing is a really scary thing.
It is, because where is my identity? You know, my identity has been, oh, well, as a friend, a Druid friend once called me Brainy Liz. You know? but you know, if I'm not Brainy Liz, who am I?
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I've been doing an online course with an Indigenous elder from Alaska, not personally, he records videos. And he talks a great deal about knowing from your heart.
Yes.
You know, the knowledge of your heart. And he says in the West, or in the developed industrialized world, we've let the head take over, and we should listen to our hearts. And the purpose of the head is to enable us to do what our hearts tell us is right. And that is such a profound. Yeah. Yes, Dean. Yes, that's interesting. To discover who you really are. Yeah. So, and that's been a profound lesson. And it explains a lot of things about our society. And, you know, science is great, and I don't knock it, and I'm interested in it. But I read an article in the paper this weekend about how, you know, creating, how do you say it, chimeras, organisms that have mixed genes from different animals.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they're talking about being able to grow organs that would be fit for human, and that's not anybody's heart says. My heart says no, but you know, it's because we can. It's the because we can syndrome,
Which is, you know, full of hubris that we can control everything, and it's so. That's so scary. Somebody says, Andrew Moore, I'm a teacher and we're only as a profession beginning to understand the holistic child. And Poppy says, the greatest lesson of my life, and I'm still learning, is to listen to my heart. You know, that notion of the three brains, the neuroception is that you have your gut, your heart, and your brain, but your head. But that the primal one is the gut. And I've had to learn. It took me a long time to learn. It's one of the, if I had to regret, is that I didn't listen to it sooner. But I was always told, remember, you could be wrong. So my default is I could be wrong. That's always my first one. So this says I could be wrong, but my gut tells me, not that I'm always right, but I know, I've learned after a long time, this is what I listen to, then my heart, and then my head. And I suppose with Druidry, when we look at our... I've done shamanic training and I've done Reiki and all sorts of other stuff, which they say, get back into your heart, leave the head out of it. And what I loved about Druidry is when you go to the Druid grade, it brings you back into the head and brings it back down so that you're working with, you know, we've got the creativity of, you know, the bardic grade, and then you're talking about all the other parts of the ovate. And then you have the philosophical notion of ethics and being of service and right action and all of that, that it's a very, very holistic way of engaging with the world or engaging with a spiritual practice, which I really, really love.
Yes. Well, I mean, in Celtic thought, there's the three cauldrons.
The three cauldrons, that's right. But you start with the cauldron of warming, and then you come up to the one of motion, and then, or vocation, and then it's the cauldron of the the cauldron of knowledge.
Yeah.
And that cannot be turned up, right, until you have the others sorted. So you really start down at the base, you know. It's really, really important.
Very important.
Do you have any regrets, Liz?
Well, as I saw Joe Dunbar the other week, and as she was saying, it in a way, regrets. You know, there are things that I regret, but obviously I wouldn't be here. I'm sad sometimes that I don't have children.
Yeah.
Because, well, for all sorts of reasons, but I think there's this feeling of, oh, you know, so when I die, that will be it. But that's actually no excuse for having children.
Oh, I agree.
And so, yes, I do regret that. It just didn't happen for various reasons. But had I had children or a child, my life would have been so unimaginably different.
Yes.
And I think the great thing about getting older is that the longer you live, the shorter as a part of your life these different periods of time become, if that makes sense. And I get an increasing sense of proportion about things. So when, for many women, I think, when they're in the middle of their child rearing, bearing years, that, what is it? Maybe 30, 35 years or something. And especially maybe the last bit of that, the 10, 15 years when the biological clock starts going and all that. At the time, it feels interminable and all-consuming.
That's right.
But then you get to 50, 60, and suddenly I look back and I think, actually, that was quite a short period of the whole. And so, although a certain sadness remains, it becomes easier. I find it's become easier. And as I say, I can't know. It's one of those path less traveled things, isn't it?
That's right.
I can't know what my life would have been like had I had a child. Maybe there would have been wonderful things that I haven't had. But would I be sitting here with my pollinator garden and all my druid friends and activities? And, I'm doing some shamanic training at the moment. I've just embarked on it. Would I be doing that? Or would I be looking after grandchildren? I mean, maybe I could do both. People do. But so, yeah, it's imponderable. I can't know. And so therefore it's best, I feel, to accept this is my life. I kind of hope there are other lives, but whether I shall know about it, I don't know. But in this incarnation, this is what I have. And I can now say, well, I accept that, and I make the very best use of it that I can, I think.
It is, and it's like it I suppose it brings us to just before the next one is about gratitude. But Anne says it took two heart attacks and a quadruple heart surgery for me to listen to the universe and wise up. And I think that's a tough wake up call, Anne. But I think you are not alone. For so many of us, it's some big thing can get us to wake up. But there's also that thing about what are you grateful for?
What am I grateful for?
Yeah.
So many things. Well, I'm grateful for my health above all, I think. A very dear friend, my yoga teacher of 30 years, has developed motor neuron disease.
Oh.
And every day I'm involved in a Zoom group that kind of supports her. But, if I feel a bit down, I sort of think, goddess willing, I'm healthy. So my health, I'm incredibly lucky. I have enough materially. I don't have to worry about money, which I know sounds maybe a bit materialistic, but it just, money doesn't buy happiness, but it helps.
Well, if it puts a roof over your head and food on your table and a bit of pocket money.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're not constantly thinking of money. I mean, there are people who are very wealthy who never stop thinking of it. And then there are people who have so little of it.
Yeah.
They're also thinking about, where's the next cup of tea going to come from, or the next loaf of bread. But to have enough that And it's knowing that you have enough, whatever your enough is.
Yes, absolutely, Eimear. And I have huge gratitude for my friends.
Yeah.
You know, I just think I'm so lucky to know so many lovely people. And what I'm really grateful for, and this is partly due to OBOD, is that I know, you know, many single people who are childless maybe don't have friends from different generations. And I do. You know, I have friends who are much younger and friends who are, well, obviously, as I get older, they're not so much older. But and that's a great blessing as well.
I think that is an important one, that transgenerational. My son will be 23 in July, and he lives in Galway. He moved away nearly 3 years ago, and he has friends younger than him, and he's also friends in their late 40s, early 50s. And he was telling me that how important it is for him to have a wide age range in terms of friends, because he can really appreciate what his contemporaries give him, or what also younger people and what older people give, which I think was absolutely beautiful. And I think as a species, you know, if we think of our ancestors living in a community with all generations, but our modern world, you know, segregates us according to age in so many ways. And I think we have so much to learn from each other.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
And the learning goes both ways.
Yes, and if you are childless, then for me it's been a lovely way to have connection with younger people and people who have children. And you know, I've interacted with many children over my life, so it has that advantage as well. And it's very mature of your son to see that, I think.
Oh, absolutely. He gets that from me. I'm saying that with modesty. I was so touched when he said it, because when I was younger, I didn't have older friends. Well, not when I was in my 20s. I did actually. I had one friend who was 14 years older than me. I'd met her in Kenya. And then my husband, Howard, I met him later. And then I was friendly with Olivia Robertson. So I was in my 50s and she was 96 when she passed. You know, and we had some wonderful conversations. We met, you know, regularly.
I bet you did. Yeah, she sounds a complete character.
Absolutely an amazing person. And then, you know, I mean, Philip had a close relationship with her when he was younger. Now, he's a bit older than me, but even so, you know, she was one of his teachers. And then when you think about him meeting Nuan when he was 15, becoming a member of the order at 18, and he was this young man with all these older people. Yes. What was it that he could see in Nuan and in all of these other people? You know, just wonderful.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? You wonder if people have some kind of intimation of their futures. I mean, have you ever come across a book by James Hillman called The Soul's Code?
Not that one.
He says basically that we know, I think he derives it from the sort of Platonic idea of people choosing their life, you know, and then going into the waters of Lethe. But he says that if you look at people who've become famous, they've often shown very, very early in their lives that they have some kind of sense of their future path. And the example he cites is the great violinist Yehudi Menuhin, who wanted a violin when he was 3 or 4, and his parents gave him a toy one, and he apparently threw it across the room and said, "No, I want a real one."
Wow.
And Hillman says people grow, there's this, you know, their soul is kind of imprinted with their future destiny and they grow into it. But you can be diverted. And like in good fairy tales, you meet people who nudge you along the way but you may not choose to hear or be able to hear them.
Well, I wouldn't see that for me. But what about you? I wanted to be a doctor, so from a very early age, and here I am. So, did you have a sense of, from a very early age?
I think I always knew I loved books and writing. And while I haven't become a famous writer or anything, I lack the application. I do write quite a lot, and I write quite well. And so I suppose in that way, that was very evident early. I remember writing, when I was young, we had to write a little thing at school, primary school, what I want to be when I grow up. And I said a writer or a teacher. And indeed, I did become a teacher. Yeah, I mean, I didn't have any, you know, I'm going to be a ballet dancer or anything. But yeah, maybe it's just that talents show themselves.
It's an interesting one, because I wanted to be a doctor. My father was one. And I also wanted to go to Africa to save the world. We had a missionary nun come to the school and show us a film. He was in Sierra Leone. And the nuns used to always do the hands up who wants to be a nun. So we'd all put our hands up. And, you know, hands up, we're going to go to Africa and save the world. And my hand was up. I didn't become a nun, obviously. But I did go to Africa, and I always knew I would do that. And I think I was a very lazy student. I couldn't study. I mean, I was bright, but I could not apply myself to save my life. So I didn't get the points. And I drifted into nursing, and that took me to Africa. And then I came back and did psychology. But then I did, so as a counseling psychologist, so that's a carer. The nursing is the caring bit. I'm a herbalist, shamanic therapist, the healing. So in a sense, a circuitous way of, more holistic than, say, a medical doctor. And, you know, I thank the goddess for my laziness.
Right.
I could have been trapped in medicine. And Howard, did you meet Howard, my husband?
Yes, briefly. Yes.
Yeah. So he was a doctor. He was a GP first, and then went into psychiatry. And he said he would never encourage his children to do medicine. He just thought it was just too difficult. Not that it's hard to do, but in terms of he was very on the edge. He was very holistic, very shamanic. So he could be very, very trapped in one particular line. And I never, ever thought I would be a druid. That was never, I knew them from the stories. And to be here within OBOD as I am now, that was never in I never saw myself.
Well, I never imagined myself a druid, but I must say this early connection with King Arthur and that body of mythos, that was very significant. So in a way, maybe that was a seed that eventually brought me here to Glastonbury, and of course Merlin always fascinated me, and the whole Lady of the Lake and stuff. So maybe that was in a little push towards the magical druidic world.
Well, you know, it's interesting you're saying that, and of course you know, Arthur and Guinevere are buried in the Abbey grounds. I've seen the grave. So you've come to one of Arthur's resting places. And I too, I mean, to be fair to the nuns that in primary school, they taught us all the legends. So I was fascinated with the stories, with the druids. So when I would hear the word druid, I would get a tingling. It was always, but I never thought that's in a fairy story. I didn't think I would be a druid, or I didn't see any possibilities. I'm being brought up as a Roman Catholic, yet, the mythologies in the landscape, it's all around us.
Yes, and that's very much the case. I think my theory is that the because the Romans never got to Ireland.
Well, the military ones didn't. The ones with the frocks did.
Well, the ones that was a bit later, wasn't it? But I just think that sort of straight line Roman attitude just never reached your island.
No, there are no straight roads. No, you're right.
That's magic to your landscape, that it exists in Wales in places, but it doesn't in Britain, in England, because we had the Romans, and then a bit later we had the Normans. There's a book by McCartney, I think it is, who founded Embercombe, about why it is that English people, in his view, are so cut off from their land. And he blames the Romans.
Oh, interesting.
It's a good book. It's called The Children's Fire. And it's just about his thoughts and how he did this pilgrimage to Anglesey to do some personal sort of semi-shamanic work to try and heal this rift, at least for himself. Who knows? But I'm sure it would have had an influence.
I think so. And it's interesting, we had the Normans as well, thanks to Henry II and the Pope. But and we had Vikings, and the Vikings settled, so we've many Viking towns that are still here. And then the Normans settled and intermarried. The English came, the wealthy English always stayed apart, I suppose, and then the more working class mingled. I suppose each invasion has had an impact, and yet we're all intermixed. I mean, I come from Norman stock. Burke is a Norman name, but my mother is Moran, which is O'Moran, the Great One. So that would be kind of more Irish, but it's a really, really interesting one. I think life takes us on a path we are to be on, even if it's in a roundabout way. I think so. Some people have, like I'm going to be, and they have the straight path, where mine has been very labyrinthine, which makes it really interesting, because then, well, I don't know. The only I think I said is that when I took on the post as chosen chief is that I'm taking this on for 7 to 9 years. That's the only straight path I've ever had, is that, when I could say I'm doing this for the next so-and-so. I've never, nothing else. I mean, obviously I had children, but I'm always that wasn't kind of it's kind of different, because it's not a job, or not this is a job either. It's something else. But when I think, okay, my future is laid out for me, how it's going to manifest, I don't know.
Well, this is it. You don't.
Which makes it really exciting, because we never know what's around the corner and what experiences are.
Well, that's right. Well, for me, that's always been the great delight in life. That, I don't know what's going to happen. I have done a job I taught in FE for about 14 years. That was my longest job. And that was a bit grim, actually, to be fair. But since then, I've done various things. And now I'm retired. I retired a few years back. It's so sad, really, because that's when I feel now I am free, because don't have to get up for a job. I can do what I like. And that, again, that's a great privilege, and it's something I'm really, really, really grateful for.
And to have the energy, to do all whatever it is to do or not to do. I think that's just wonderful. Yeah. And like you say, being grateful for the health that you have to be able to do that, I think is something I'm very grateful to, is my own health, and energy to be able to engage with life. One concern that you have about the modern world?
Well, my concern is that, Well, I suppose, I mean, it's easy to say, oh, climate change and all that, but actually, my real concern is that nature will be obliterated, and that science will find a way to somehow keep us all going without having kind of abolished nature. And that's a real fear I have, because the people with so much power, who, like the Zuckerbergs and I mean, I know Bill Gates but Microsoft, and the Jeff Bezos and all those, Elon Musk, they're all people who don't come, it seems to me, from their gut or their heart. They're just head people, and they have so much power, and I find that really concerns me. And many people think, I mean, look at the success of Amazon. Okay, partly because of the pandemic, but it's also because of convenience, and it just does so much damage. And all that really concerns me. For all we've spoken about the uses of tech, and obviously there are great uses and benefits, but I fear it's often being used for not very good ends, and just to sell us things and harvest our data. So, and that's when people talk about 5G, and how they're concerned about the health risks. It's not particularly that bothers me, but what does bother me is it's another way in which we are seeking to be better than nature, to, for there not to be, Elon Musk launching all his mini satellites so that nowhere in the world will not have signal. Well, let's have some areas where there isn't, where nature can just get on with things. And I don't know, anyway.
That's a really an interesting one, because if we say, okay, we're not going to have it in Glastonbury, and you go, well, what about the people in Glastonbury? They need access to signal, whatever. I was away in my camper van last weekend with some friends in their camper van in the pouring rain with a tarp and a little open fire, and there was no signal. So I was away for 3 days with nothing. And it was, I found the relief, but I also needed to cycle 20 for 20 minutes to get signal, to text somebody to say, I've no signal, so I can't be in touch with you. So I was grateful that I had to, but I did cycle in the rain, the 20 minutes, and said, it's raining, I can't even ring, but I'll just text you. But there was that lovely relief to think if there are places with no signal, but we don't need signal in the middle of the woods, but I suppose where people are living and need to work, you need it. So there's that. How do you have that balance between places that have been untouched by technology and then people needing access, like the fact that we have access and that people from all over the world have access to? I mean, we have sometimes viewers from Africa, Asia, as well as North and South America and the Southern Hemisphere. So it's a challenging one.
Yeah, it's deeply challenging. I think my gut feeling is that as we go into the future, as is already happening, there will be people who refuse it. But those people, unfortunately, I think will be very marginalised. And already we're getting to the stage where it's quite difficult to function if you don't have quite a high-performing computer.
That's right.
Banking, TV license, driving, everything is going online. And yeah, it's made convenient, but of course people are losing jobs because of it.
Right.
And it's, I mean, maybe sometimes, and then sometimes I think, well, you know, if we're evolving, you know, if this is a bit cliched, but if the universe or we as a species are evolving in some way that's inevitable, then maybe we can't do anything, and maybe it will go, who knows, maybe it's just part of evolution and we can't stop it. Or maybe an even more massive pandemic will come along and wipe us all out. I don't know.
Well, I've heard this saying that, you know, they're not worried about nature because nature will survive. We just wipe ourselves out as a species. And, you know, when there's no human, I don't know if you've seen this, a little video clip of the pandemic's over and people start come out and they're all with long hair and grey roots and everything else. And they're running to their office buildings and they're covered in vines. And they're pulling them back to get back into the workplace. But that notion that nature takes over, you know, like they discovered Machu Picchu in the 1930s, and it had been hidden, you know, by trees and forests since the time of the Spanish invaders. And that's a really interesting thing when they discovered it by accident.
Yeah, I do take comfort in that sometimes, and I think if you take the long view, like 1,000 years into the future, you know, I remember I used to drive down motorways and think, oh, this is awful. And then I think, well, 1,000 years into the future, there'll probably just be marks on a landscape, and whether anyone will be there who's sentient to see them, who knows? But
somebody says nature always wins. Well, you know what's really interesting when I motorways is looking at the wildflowers that had disappeared because of modern farming. So we get cowslips.
yeah,
That, you know, there were. I grew up with cowslips everywhere and primroses, but on the embankment on either side of the motorways here, they're full of cowslips that weren't. They came themselves because they're free. You know, because there's no sprays being put on them. So somehow, even that, you know, motorways can create some kind of wildlife corridor for trees and for plants in that. I mean, I'm ambivalent about motorways, but I appreciate the convenience of them.
well,
Yeah.
and we are a species that's programmed to want convenience. That is how we've evolved, because we constantly seek the easiest way to do things. You know, if you think about the development of tools, you know, people could have gone on banging stones and making hand axes, but then they found metal, which was more effective, and so on.
But the fallacy about convenience is, you know, I remember in secondary school, I was in the 70s, when I remember the teacher saying, and, you know, we're going to have to learn how to manage our leisure time because the working week will be shorter and we will have more time on our hands, and we will have to learn how to use that because of the development of computers. And in those days, the computers were ginormous. You know, there were these big rooms that they had them, and I'm still waiting for. I mean, I've created my own leisure time, but if I was being employed by somebody else, it's like these tools and all these gadgets free us up to do more work, not free us up for more pleasure.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. But I mean, do you think that's because governments actually don't want people to be free and creative because they might decide they don't need the government?
That's right, and they might start thinking.
And also, I mean, demand in a capitalist system is fueled by people not being very happy, needing, I don't know, instant meals or robot hoovers or, whatever, and not having televisions and computers, because they're not with a group of people who can just happily sit round a fire and tell each other stories.
That's right. There's always a new thing we need, some new little bit of junk or eye candy or something that it's novelty, where when you are, I know that I pre-COVID went this Earth Song camp. I've gone a few years with my daughter, and it's drug and alcohol free. So it's probably like a drug camp, but no drugs, no alcohol, and it's completely no tech. So it's sitting in, you live in groups of maybe 15 to 20 people, and you cook on an open fire. And so there's no electricity, and phones are only allowed in the car park. And so it's a 9-day camp, and it is just pure and utter bliss. And you're sitting around, and even my daughter, meeting people and engaging with her own age group. And then when she later on in the summer met them outside, and she said it was terrible because people kept taking their phones out and we weren't sitting around talking. Oh, you're frozen, Liz. I see that. Oh dear. Anyway, I'm hoping you can come back. Has she frozen to others of you? Oh, she's gone. Maybe she's going to come back again. All right. I just, I see, I think it was Tara saying that you're talking about your challenge with low technology. Your rural fire district has difficulty with no cell service to much of the community. That is a concern. So I know you're describing it as a tough trade-off for rural living. And indeed it is. So it's how we manage that. I think, I don't know what's happened. Liz is coming back now. So let's see. Okay. Oh, yes. And Tara, you said the medical services. I mean, that is a big one. Yeah. And I don't know, what did you do before cell phones? People had landlines, but we seem to have bypassed landlines. Welcome back, Liz.
It's very windy here, and my internet suddenly just sort of went down, but it's back again, fortunately. I'm very sorry, everybody.
Not at all. We're just talking about sitting around a fire. I don't know what time you disappear, but my daughter loving sitting around, being with her age mates, and then discovering when they met outside of camp, people had their phones, and how disappointed she was. And that's something I did last weekend. We had a tarp. It was lashing rain, and we had a small open fire that wasn't damaging on the ground. It was off the ground, and it was just bliss, just sitting around. Yeah. That's okay. What is it? Anna says technology heard me complaining and shut out. Yeah, that's.
Oh, great one.
There's Anne Cannon says, as a child, I loved sitting with my granny and my great aunt Aggie, listening to their stories. Best childhood ever. I think there's something around the simplicity. And I think with lockdown, I think for my daughter, I think is really appreciating the importance of physical contact, because with the first lockdown, her only contact was through her technology, which prior to that would have been stuck on it anyway. And then you begin to realize how it's useful, it's handy, it's great. It is not a substitute for actually being in the physical presence of somebody. And that is something I am so looking forward to. So we have spoken about the concerns. What gives you hope about the modern world, Liz?
I think the fact that, young people are becoming very involved in the climate and the environmental awareness. I don't think it's good enough just to say, oh, they'll get on with it. But it is heartening because, realistically, I know that my time here is relatively limited. and so that's heartening. And I think I was saying to a friend, we do have to remember that although things seem very dire, our lives in this time, again, in the industrialized world where there aren't wars, I mean, the wars are maybe farmed out, but that's another topic. You know, our lives are longer than they ever have been, and certainly more comfortable, even from my memory of what it was like when I was a little girl. And you know, when we think, oh, this is a dreadful time, well, it wasn't much fun, probably. Well, it definitely wasn't any fun being a Jew in Nazi Germany.
No.
Or in the 30 Years' War in the 17th century in Germany, or when Genghis Khan swept across the steppes of Asia. I mean, so, you know, sometimes I do think that, well, it's you know, life is a mixture, isn't it? And so I think it pays to be realistic in that way and hope that for all of the political systems seem to be failing, you know, that the yin yang symbol where everything has a seed in it that brings it to the other. And I'm just praying really that although I feel very depressed when I look at our government here in England, that, you know, with time it will swing back to something better. So I live in faith and hope, and sometimes I feel I'm a bit foolish for doing so, but the alternative is just to be miserable all the time.
And that's not going to get you anywhere. I mean, I remember growing up in Catholic Ireland, which was very, very restrictive. You know, we had Magdalene laundries. If young women got pregnant outside of marriage, they were put into these places. All that's gone. You know, I remember the disgrace of being a separated woman. I mean, I was divorced, and I remember thinking, oh, thank God it's now, because had it been 30 years previously, I would have had to hold my head in shame. There's lots of things that are so much better. In Ireland, the freedom to be a Druid. I've never had to keep this hidden, you know, and I taught in a seminary for 27 years. Everybody's open. I've taught priests and nuns who know what I do. And it's just, I find that Ireland at the moment is a safe place to live. How long it's going to last, you know, it's compared to what it was when I was growing up.
Yes.
In terms of
I first went to Ireland in the late 70s, I think. And I remember watching crowds of people going to church on a Sunday,
yes.
Literally crowd. And, you know, it did feel quite a restricted place. But my more recent visits, well, it's been a breath of fresh air and a glimpse of great civilization compared to what we have. You know, it's just so, yeah, I suppose there's always hope of progress. And I think the pandemic showed that people will take it into their own hands and be good sometimes. Doesn't always last, but it's there.
Absolutely. One question before we finish is, I always ask this question, what's your favorite season and what's your favorite ceremony on the Wheel of the Year?
Well, I think my favorite, actually the two aren't the same. My
That's
favorite
right.
my favorite time of year is actually this time, May and going into June, because everything's so lush and the beautiful energy of the greenness and they're just a miracle. You can almost see things growing as you watch.
Yes.
And that there's an awful time in February when I think, oh, the trees will never get green again. And then suddenly it's like a rainforest out there, and the birds and everything. So that's gorgeous. But my favourite, I think, honestly, my favourite festival is Samhain, and I love. I think it's that thinning of the veil. It's a very deep time, very quiet time, and this feeling that our ancestors are they're kind of reachable all the time, but they do feel nearer at the Samhain ceremony, and giving them offerings of food and I mean, we often name people.
That's right.
Invite them in, those who wish us well. And yeah, it's a lovely feeling. And again, I think it's something that, we forget our ancestors at our peril, really, because then we're just present. And I remember when my father died, going to visit him in the chapel in the Undertakers. And he was, 92 or something.
Wow.
It was sad. It was, it was fitting. It was right in the way that he died. It was part of life. And when I went to see him, I was a bit, obviously I've seen dead bodies before, but I thought, oh, this is my father. And when they took me in, I looked at him and I thought, it's okay, he's become an ancestor.
That's right.
Because he had great sort of, he just looked very dignified. And I think that's a lovely thought, that no matter how much we fail in this life, or, I don't suppose there's a person alive who thinks, oh, I could have done that better. But even if we don't have children, we will become ancestors.
Absolutely. And I mean, often I ask, what would you like to leave behind, or how do you see yourself, your role as a future ancestor? And I think in many ways you've mentioned that as you're writing, but even in your pollinating garden, that will have an impact. And it's really interesting how our actions now, like in that keeping bees or having plants to support bees and other pollinators or whatever, that has an impact going to the future, and your activism as well.
Well, I hope so. I hope I've made a contribution. But there's that song, isn't there? We are tomorrow's ancestors.
That's right. Yes. That's we sing that, or we get Paul Corcoran at our sound ceremony. We always sing that, and it's a lovely chant. And that notion of feeding the ancestors, which I love, and I first come across that in Africa. That notion of feeding ancestors. And my father died while I came home from Africa to be with him, and he died. And the Turkana were the tribe I was living with, or living in the north of Kenya. It's a desert. And for them, the tribe consisted of those who were yet to be born, those who were living, and those who had gone to the other world. And that notion that you were never dead as long as somebody remembered you. And that was one of the comforting things for me when my father died, was that, okay, we will still talk about him. And that really reassured me. And then Harrod's gone and people still talk about him. Somebody bought one of his poetry books today from me. So he's still there and still alive. He's not my immediate ancestor, but he's part of my ancestors in that, the ancestors of this place and of my life and of our children. And I think that is beautiful, that connection that we have with them. And most people say Samhain is their favorite of the festivals.
Isn't that interesting?
It really is.
Interesting. It's almost as though there's a soul memory or a folk memory of exactly what you say about, was it the Tuakana?
Yeah.
That we don't live in an unanchored present. You know, that this thing about, oh, there's only the present. I mean, that's true in a sense, but this idea of being in a space between.
Yes.
And you know, the Venerable Bede has that lovely image of life is like a sparrow flying through a mead hall. It flies and goes out from the night and then goes out into the night. But you know, maybe it's not just the night. It's maybe it's the dream time, I suppose.
Yes.
Where, and as for those yet to be born, that's beautiful as well.
Yeah. So, Liz, it's been such a joy talking to you, and I really, really thank you. And so, what you and I later, or just after I say goodbye, we look at the comments. So, I want to thank you so much for joining me for this evening's Fireside Chat. It's been absolutely wonderful. So, don't go away. I'm going to. If you want to say goodbye, and then I'll switch you off, and then I'll talk to you.
I haven't been able to see names, but so hello to anyone I know, and thank you for coming to watch and listen. Bye-bye.
I think there were a number of people, and it was too quick. Are looking forward to Liz Hugs at White Horse Camp, and we look at them again, and you'll see. Anyway, thanks a million, Liz. So it's just been lovely having you all tonight, and your comments, and joining in the conversation. So I hope you enjoyed it too. I look forward to seeing you next week for another Fireside Chat when I have another mystery guest, a member of the Order of Bards, Ovids and Druids. So until then, slán go fóill, and enjoy the rest of your evening, the rest of your day, the rest of your morning. So until next week, slán go fóill.